Today's guest is Erik Goins. He's the founder and CEO of Flywheel Studio. And what Flywheel does is they take real ideas and turn them into apps, whether it's a website and or mobile. Now, you may be thinking, can't I just vibe code and use an app like Lovable to create what it is that I want? And the answer just depends on the level of complexity, but I'll let Erik answer that question. So if you are a startup or you are looking to create a startup when you don't know, how to start, what skills you need, or how to turn your idea into a real product, then this is something that you're going to want to pay attention to. He's a non-technical founder who has seen many startups succeed and many fail, and why it is that they do. In this episode, we also cover a step-by-step path that he recommends on how to build a startup today, what things non-technical founders consistently get wrong about building software, when and should you hire developers, if at all, the biggest mistakes he's seen in their minimal visible product or MVP, what type of features that it should include, when and when you should not hire an agency, when he saw a gap in the market and how he identified it, and whether or not there was a turning point specifically when he decided to launch his own company. That being said, let's get straight into it. For many people trying to build their first startup without guidance, one of their biggest fears is, do I need to hire developers? How much is it going to cost? Can AI replace developers? So it's kind of a two-piece question. But firstly, as AI tools are getting better, are people able to build or so-called vibe code without vibe code as SaaS without hiring developers at all?
It's a great question. There's quite a bit to unpack there. So let's just start with the first premise of what should you do? Should you try and do it yourself? Should you hire a developer? Should you hire an agency? Should you hire a whole team? A lot of that comes down to your capabilities, whether you actually understand how technology works, whether you have some background in technology or at least in systems and design thinking. If you have that background, you can probably vibe code an application today if it is not super technically complex, or at least you can get started. And I'll come back to that a little bit. But if you don't have that experience, then I would recommend almost not doing it at all and either hiring or finding a CTO. And the reason for that is that it's really, when you're designing a software application, it is fundamentally different than designing a good business idea. A good business idea might be a product or a service and how you want to frame that within the market. But making software work is actually fundamentally different. Like structuring a database has nothing to do with building a good business. And while you can use AI for a lot of that today, you typically are better off focusing on the sales and marketing side, and you'll get a higher ROI out of that than trying to go learn everything about technology. There's a lot of different opinions out there, but my opinion is if you are building a business, somebody needs to be dedicated to the sales side, to the marketing side and distribution. That's actually the hard part. And so in my opinion, it's actually less expensive to hire somebody or go get a co-founder to do the technical work.
Gotcha. So I guess it would depend on the complexity of what you're trying to build, right? Because some things you can't just type into a prompt and say, I want this to be done. Some things need to be actually tailored to the specifics on what is required to achieve the goal.
Exactly. So if you wanted to build something really simple, for example, an N8N automation that takes a document and extracts some information and puts it into another system of record, if there was an API or something for that, you could vibe code that. You could go to Claude Code. You could even use OpenAI or ChatGPT or Gemini, almost any of those, and ask it how to do that. And you could piece that together. When you get into actual SaaS products and larger system design, it's a full-time job to do that. We are taking experienced developers to build those software products, and those are taking experienced developers months. So to sit there and say that that you're going to do it in your spare time without experience is probably a little bit overzealous and probably more of AI marketing than anything else. We're using AI just as much as everyone else. Every one of our developers has AI subscriptions. Some of them even have multiple. So it's not like we're not using it, but we still use developers to build those products. So you can kind of look at that and say, well, if everyone is using developers with AI to build products, but I don't have any experience, the odds are kind of stacked against you in terms of building something that's really scalable, well designed, secure. But of course, if it's something really small, if it's like a calculator, then yeah, you can go do that for sure.
Yeah, real quickly, what's your foresight into future as AI develops? I mean, are developers, I imagine they're still going to be they're still going to be viable to a point, but are they going to become less required or needed as AI improves?
I think it depends on what you think a developer is. So some people think developers are people who write code. And in that sense, yeah, I don't think that they have a very bright outlook. I would be very pessimistic about that future for them. If all you do is if your value add is that you can write code, that's going to be a real problem. If your value add is really thinking about problems and how to solve them with technology and designing systems, then I think you're here to stay. And for me, developers are a group of people who create software. They build and create software, and they do it by any means necessary or any means possible. And so in that regard, with AI, you still have developers. They just, the skills that they have and how they go about their process change because now they're leveraging AI to do the development. But that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing.
Well, if someone wants to build a SaaS and they can't code, what's an actual step-by-step path that you'd recommend?
If typically I recommend hiring an agency or finding a co-founder, one of the two. I think that you get a higher ROI taking the lead on the sales and operations side or the marketing side yourself, and then having somebody do the technical side. That said, if those aren't viable options, then I would learn how AI software development works. And one of the key things I would emphasize or recommend to anyone who's thinking about this is I would say I would learn how to plan a project and how to ask good questions. Because one of the things that's really interesting is AI really does know how to solve almost all the technical problems out there. It just won't do it unless you ask. So you actually have to go through this process of understanding what are the right things to be asking and when to ask those in the project and how to ask them, right? How to ask is, are there any hard-coded API keys in my project, right? Are there any API keys that would be at risk on the client side? Those are kind of like things that for somebody listening, if you're not technical, that probably just made absolutely no sense. But that's the point. Those are hard questions to ask when you don't know what they are. But all of the work in AI software development is upfront. It's in the planning. And then some of it's in, I would say, the expertise or where it gets good is knowing what questions to ask and when.
Okay, yeah. So hiring a co-founder, or hiring an agency.
Mhm.
So let's say someone's looking to hire an agency, right? What separates the people who get amazing results from the agencies versus people who waste money? I know that the agency's competency and how well they perform is going to be a big influence, but I just wanted to get your insight on that.
It's a great question, and it can depend on so many things. But here's a few, like probably the two guiding principles I would say. One is on average, you get what you pay for, but the more you pay does not necessarily mean the better the results. there's a very strong curve where if you hire somebody for $1,000 to build an application, somebody who charges 10,000 is not probably 10 times better. They're probably like 100 times better. But if somebody charges $100,000, I don't know if they're actually 10 times better than 10,000. They might be 5 times better. And if somebody charges $1 million, they're probably not 10 times better than the $100,000 person. They're probably 2 to 3 times better. So at some level, you see extremely diminishing returns. Of course, it just depends on the product and the amount of experience or expertise you're buying. The second thing I would think about though is who has done this before and what are they going to do for me? So not to emphasize what we do, but we offer a different set of services than what most other agencies do. So when you talk about what we charge, it's different than what other agencies charge because we're also doing different things. You wouldn't want to necessarily put those side by side. You would want to actually say, what's the right fit and the right partner for me? And you want to look for somebody who's done this before. You don't want them to be learning on your dime. Now, of course, every product's new. There's probably something unique about it that maybe nobody has done before in some way. But overall, you want to try and find somebody who you feel really comfortable with because building software is more like a marriage than it is anything else. So don't get married until you're ready, and make sure that it's somebody you feel really comfortable with, that you have a great relationship with, you like to talk to them, you like to work with them, because building a product, there's going to be good times and bad, and you want to make sure that you trust the person across from you as part of that.
Sounds like you're talking about marrying a wife, a woman. I like the same thing.
It feels like that sometimes. It does.
Well, cool. What are the warning signs a founder should not hire an agency?
I think the biggest warning sign is if you have a product that is going to take an exceptionally long time for adoption, or you have a sense that it's going to require a significant amount of work before monetization, then then hiring an agency is probably difficult from a financial perspective. So, for example, hiring an agency is let me take a step back. You really only have two options in building a business. You can pay with cash or you can pay with equity. Now, if you're going to pay with cash, then technically you know exactly what you're going to pay, or what you can guess what you're going to pay and what you're going to receive, and you are taking all the risk. Almost no agencies work for equity. All agencies and freelancers, for the most part, all work for cash. So you have to pay to play. And think about it as hiring somebody. If you want to work with an agency for a year or 2 years to build a product, it's going to be expensive. You're hiring a team of people who are professionals to show up and do this. It is going to be more expensive than just hiring one person. It's quite expensive. So you need to have the budget to do that, or the product needs to support that. On the other side, you can pay with equity, which means, of course, that somebody's going to own a piece of the business. They have significantly more upside. If it's successful, they're going to really reap the rewards, but they're also very much sharing in the risk. So if you have a product that's going to take 2 years to get adoption, and you want somebody in the trenches with you, and you don't have the budget to pay an agency for 2 years, then you should probably be looking for a co-founder who would accept equity to go do this with you.
Yeah, because I see a positive and a negative side with the equity piece, because if it's an equity based, then their success, they're probably more driven to see it succeed. Right. And then the negative side is they're taking on the risk. So you're saying it would be really just based off how long they think it's going to take for someone to gauge whether they want to offer equity as opposed to cash, or it just depends on
It
cash on.
really Yeah, it's always, I think it almost always comes down to the founder's personal financial situation and their network of people and the quality of those people. In some scenarios, you see two founders join forces, they become obviously co-founders, and they're just a ruthless force of efficiency that is going to make this a successful business no matter what. And they're willing to really play the long game. On the other side, we do see a lot of people hire flaky co-founders. It's a terrible thing to say, but it happens all the time, probably more often than not, where you see somebody hire a co-founder or they have a co-founder. That person works for 3 months and then gets disillusioned with the product, the direction. Maybe it's making no money. And then they're sitting there saying, okay, well, I could go get a job anywhere and I would be actually making money. And here I'm not making any money, but I'm working like a dog. So maybe I should go get a job. And so in those scenarios, there is quite a bit of risk too. So I think it is the quality of the connections you have, whether a co-founder is actually a viable option. And at the end of the day, if they, it's going to be a case by case scenario. The big red flag, though, I would say is a lot of people don't understand the product they want to build. And in that scenario, you really should not hire an agency because if you don't know what you are trying to achieve, paying somebody else for that is going to be very expensive. And we spend a lot of time thinking about that and we do a lot of strategy around it. But the best projects are where clients have a very good idea of what they're trying to achieve, and then we help them land the plane with the actual specifics. But if it's too broad or it doesn't have a competitive advantage, then you are probably just lighting money on fire, and that's not worth it.
Because I was going to ask, maybe you don't, how people who don't really have very many connections go about finding a good co-founder.
There's a lot of organizations or groups out there online. There's Discord channels, there's forums, there's all kinds of things out there. The main thing I would say is get involved in the internet. Get involved and meet people and go find better people who are really intellectually curious or really driven. And then look at what they have done historically, if they've found success in certain areas, if they have the right characteristics. And don't take the first person that comes to you and don't take the easiest person. That's almost guaranteed to backfire. But I think there's probably plenty of examples of people who have found a great co-founder just on the internet.
I wanted to talk about MVPs, since you've seen, so many MVPs built across different startups. What's the biggest mistake founders make when defining their minimal visible product?
Yeah, today the number one problem is first, I think MVPs have a bad reputation. Today, you can't do the MVP that people were doing in 2010. Applications have to look good. They have to be very performant. You cannot have bugs or poor experience. So in that scenario, the threshold for an MVP is higher than what it used to be. But what I challenge people to do is identify what actually would determine whether the product is a viable product. Let's just take Airbnb, for example. The question is, would somebody stay in somebody else's house and rent a room for a night? The question it's not really, does Airbnb have an API? Does it have dynamic pricing? Does it have guest security? Does it have insurance? All of those things add value to the platform and make it more valuable or help it expand in its market over time. But at the end of the day, if people won't stay in somebody else's house, then that's all for naught. I mean, that doesn't help at all. And when you look at a lot of the most successful products that we consider successful startups today, they didn't start where they are today. And a lot of people overestimate that, I think, how much you need to go out into the market. As an example, Uber originally did not have a mobile app. It was an SMS-based texting service. So when you think about a lot of the features that determine like, would somebody call a car from their mobile phone and how would they do it? Uber's a great service today, but it did not start there to prove the actual idea. So trying to identify like what is that real core thing that you can go out with is very, very difficult. And it's very difficult for most founders to try and keep it within that scope. No matter what, you have a limited amount of budget. Everyone does. You don't have a truly infinite amount of spend. So you're better off trying to identify the minimum viable product, which is that one idea, do it really, really well, and then save your budget for additional features later. A lot of people have a budget, let's call it $50,000, and they go and they spend $50,000 on the MVP. They build a bunch of stuff people don't want or need. Once they actually have users, those users ask for things, and then they don't have money to go actually go build all these new features. So in that scenario, you've actually hurt yourself by overspending. So my advice is keep it simple. Identify what's actually going to prove whether it's a good idea or not. Try to do it with the smallest budget possible. Prove that people want the product, they use the product, you can retain them. And then from there, everything else is just scaling.
Your experience building dozens of products, what features should almost never be in the first MVP?
That's tough. It really depends so much on what your product is. But in general, I would probably say one obvious one is things like photo editing capabilities. If people are posting photos, that's usually a value add, unless your app is literally for photo editing. If you have a social media app, photo editing is usually an accessory, not a core functionality. There's a lot around maybe safety or collaboration or other bells and whistles that people like to add. And then one of the biggest ones that's really tough is gamification. And gamification is almost always one that is an infinite bottomless pit of work and money because it's never done. It'll never be complete. It can only get better. And people think that they're going to have this amazing gamification system that's going to drive people to use the app. But if the core of the app isn't good, then the gamification doesn't matter. So you can really figure that out in advance before you build the gamification, whether it's worthwhile or not. I would add
So,
one thing. A lot of this is for net new ideas where you're bringing something to market where something doesn't exist. If you're trying to go up against an existing company that already has a lot of mind share, then you might be tied into some kind of competition in terms of features or functionality. But I would really challenge people before they do that. A lot of people just say, I don't like Uber, so I want to go build my own Uber. And that's probably one of the worst things you can do.
making sure it actually provides value and is in demand. Is there a specific moment you decided that you want to start your own company, or was it something that you always wanted to do?
Would say that it happened very naturally or organically for me, where we saw where the market was going for software development. We knew what people were looking for, and there wasn't another opportunity to provide it. And I started an agency to meet that demand. In many ways, we did not set out to build the agency we have today in terms of being intentional. We didn't have a 5-year or a 10-year plan that set this out. It's really because we saw demand, we began meeting that demand, and then that demand has continued to ask us for additional products and services. And we ask ourselves what we can do to be a good partner for anyone out there. And we actively improve ourselves, our offering, our team to meet that. And so that really has driven us to be the business we are today. It's very customer led, I would say.
So you observed a gap in the market, and you decided that you could provide a solution for it. It wasn't like you didn't always have a desire to be a founder. You just capitalized on the opportunity when you saw it.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, cool. Is there any advice that has stuck with you throughout your journey?
There's a lot, but I would probably say at the end of the day, if you have an idea and you want to give it a shot, there's no better time than doing it today.
In your experience, who tends to achieve greater financial success? The people who are primarily motivated by money and status, materialistic things, or those driven by helping others and creating a meaningful impact?
In terms of financial success, it can certainly be both, but I've seen people very focused on money actually perform very, very well when they're very intelligent and thoughtful about it. But I would say on average, I don't think that makes them happier.
Would you say that if you actually have a desire to help others and do a great job for them and leave a meaningful impact, that money and status usually come with that?
I think certainly to some degree, but I would also say that you will be more satisfied or fulfilled from that, even if those don't directly come from that. The happiest founders that I know that we work with are building applications that they are insanely passionate about. And while I think that they do very well financially, I'm not going to say that it's necessarily the most successful financial applications. I'd say that they're the happiest founders.
Awesome. Well, is there anything for the people who are looking to launch a startup or are thinking about it? Is there any last piece of advice that you would give them?
I would say first, you can live in analysis paralysis forever and just keep learning and never do anything. Obviously, that's not going to get you there. But also, you can ask people, you can reach out to me, other people on the internet. You can reach out to, I think people are a lot more open than you think as long as you are respectful and you come prepared. And you can always ask for advice or even sometimes help if you need it. And we're really always very happy to help.